Hello, everybody. It's James here, WSI, my guest this week. If you watched WWF between 1980 and 1986, you will know this man very well. He was on all the Allentown tapings, all the other. So it was All Star. It was the other place. There was Superstars. There was Wrestling Challenge. You're all over it between 1886. I'm going to throw it to former executioner and still big. It's Ron Shaw. How you doing, man?
I'm doing fine, James, and it's great to be on your show.
Yeah, eventually, we've made it.
Yes.
Oh, goodness me. It's been, I'm trying to have a look here. Yeah, we've spent 45 minutes trying to get all the right settings and everything. Now all the problems are on my end, but
Oh boy.
we shall soldier through and the audio's coming through pretty good. So the first question I asked you before it all went wrong the first time was give us your history before going to the WWF in 1980 and how you ended up getting into the business.
Yeah, well, sure. After graduating from high school, and as I say, I wanted to become a professional wrestler when I was 8 years old.
Hmm.
I was taken to the Camden Convention Hall by my cousin who just started his practice as a doctor. And he took me, my father, and a couple of my uncles down there. And during intermission, he took me down to the dressing room and was introduced to some pretty big names at the time: Crazy Lou Graham, Dominic DeNucci, Bull Ramos, and a lot of other wrestlers at the time. And that stuck in my mind. When you're 8 years old, those things can happen. So I started watching wrestling on TV. Never missed a Saturday, and continued to go on. And then got bigger in high school, and I was interested in joining the wrestling team, amateur wrestling, but they didn't have it at the time. So I got on their case about it, and it just happened to be in my senior year that they got a program up for amateur wrestling. So we kind of like started that, but they didn't have the funds to do it. Uh, and a couple of years later, they got it going, and they actually won a couple of city titles, which was a really really good thing. But I was working with my father in construction and driving a truck part time, but it was always on my mind that I was going to do this, and I was building myself up, and I was like about 240 pounds at the time. So I was still a big guy then. And I said, well, I needed to be good size, and I knew what the business was about. And so I started going down to the Philadelphia arena where they tape championship wrestling and so forth. And then I think it was through a program. They called it Evening Magazine, which is like one of 5 days a week that they would show this, and they had Killer Kowalski's School of Pro Wrestling on. And I said, I said, well, there's a big name. How many times have I watched Walter Kowalski, at the Philadelphia Arena or at the Spectrum in Philadelphia? So I got in contact with him, and he said, hey, come on up. He goes, I'll introduce you to the guys working. This is where you're going to stay if you're interested. And I drove up to Salem, Massachusetts, and it was a YMCA up there. And come back in January after the Christmas break, and you can start. So 16 weeks later after training, I told Walter, I said, hey, Walter, I said, how am I doing? He said, you're doing great. I said, that's fine. I said, next week is my last week. I said, I want to go back, and hopefully you can make a call to the WWF. I'd like to go work for them. And he did. And maybe 2 weeks later, after I got back in Philadelphia, Gorilla Monsoon called me at home and said, hey, Ron, come on up to Allentown to do TV taping. And it took a couple months before they introduced me to come back to, or invited me to come to All Star Wrestling in Hamburg, PA, just down the road. So that's where it kicked off.
Where because you brought up Walter, and there were schools in those days were few and far between. What were his training methods, and how much would a young prospect get charged for training with Kowalski?
Well, I considered it to be pretty inexpensive. It was about 1,200. Well, it was $1,200 to be exact, and I may have had $1,400 in my bank account at the time. So, but his training was what you would see. I mean, today I think it's an insult that they look at us as actors because we portrayed athletes. We worked out, and Kowalski, we would hit hard. He taught me hit hard. If you can't make it look good, hit hard. And I was always known for hitting hard. and that's pretty much what I did. The training, he trained such lengths to really, sink into us that, hey, this just isn't, fun play and so forth. We had gotten bloody noses, and I broke my ankle years down the road. I've broken fingers and jammed thumbs and everything else. And I even got a crooked shoulder today because of professional wrestling. So
Yeah.
yeah, we all took our lumps.
But it was always what you wanted to do, so you've got to take the rough with the smooth, I suppose. Can you take me through a typical day, at a TV taping back in 80, 81, at the the Allentown tapings? Let's say what time would you have to get there? Who would tell you what you were doing that night, and so forth?
Yeah, sure. Well, I'll give you for instance, matter of fact, the very first time that I went up there to be so I went up to Allentown, and I went up early because I knew that they did the interviews beforehand, and they would do that probably 3, 4 hours before, and it was long because they had to do the interviews for every major town that was coming up. So I sat in the bleachers just to watch this, and I found this fascinating, because this was totally new to me. And so, I would say about an hour before the show would start, which I believe they did it at 7 o'clock because it was 3 hours of tapings with a 20-minute break in between. And plus, they'd have a dark match at the end, so they would hold the people in the seats for the television, so it always looked filled. And so I would be already getting dressed up and so forth, and Gorilla Monsoon would put the first page for the first hour up on a wall. And if I wasn't on there, I'd stick around and he'd put up the second page. And if I wasn't on that one, he'd put up the third one. And sure enough, there I was, and probably the last match of the night. So here I am getting there probably 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and I'm probably the last match, and I got to drive back to Philadelphia. And so, yeah, my very first match was against Tony Atlas.
Mm.
Okay, when they introduced me. And I worked as a heel because, one of the things that I was, as I say, understanding this business, what I was concerned about is that, I didn't want to work as a face. When you work as a face on TV, you're just getting, you're beat up, no chances for a comeback and so forth. And, I'm not going to say they kept me as a heel. Occasionally I did work with Stan Hansen a little bit, but even he allowed me to, have a comeback and so forth. But they continued to use me as a heel, which I was very happy about. But that being my first match with the WWF, the real first match happened when I was still at Kowalski's school, maybe in the last month or so, because occasionally Angelo Savoldi, who was the agent up in New England area, he would call Walter for a couple guys for a match. So one day Walter says, "Hey, look," he goes, "you're going to work up in, I think it was New Hampshire." They knew, and they told me to go meet a guy in Boston. I don't know if you ever heard of Fred Marzino.
No, I've not.
Okay, fine. Well, he was, I have to say, probably one of the worst workers in this business. And if I was a promoter, I would not have used guys like him because you wanted to make this look as real as possible, right? So I go to meet him, and he was going to drive, and I introduced myself to him, and he says, "Hi, I'm Fred Marzino," and this guy was a chain smoker. We're going all the way up to New Hampshire, and first of all, he's got no idea where he was going. I had no idea where we just knew that the little town that we were going to, and it was a high school, matter of fact. And I'm saying, boy, this was torture riding with this guy. All he's complaining about is that, oh God, Pat's going to be chasing me all over the dressing room, and I didn't know what the hell that meant. I never know. And then we're talking about Pat Patterson. And sure enough, we get into the high school. We were late. I think we were into the first or second match, and we get into the dressing room, and sure enough, I sit down, and there's Pat Patterson chasing Fred Marzino all over the dressing room. Nothing against Pat, but I didn't know Pat was like that at the time. That was my first match against Fred Marzino, and it was such a shame because I had to put him over. So, yeah.
Oh, dear, I'll be asking more about the upper management and things like that in a little bit. I will ask you this: which of the two did you prefer, the agricultural hall or the field house?
Um, actually, um, maybe I should lean a little bit towards the field house, but that the people, it's the people that really make your night. I mean, they're into wrestling and they just don't sit there and they're cheering, they're booing, they're getting into the act themselves. And there's a lot of great buildings that we went into, and the fans were just fantastic. And I can pick a couple out. One being the CYO in Scranton, Pennsylvania, was just awesome. Well, I mean, the people were just awesome, unbelievable. But that's what it really, you can really get into it because of the people, the fans, the reactions and so forth. So yeah.
With actually, I had this as well, so I do want to bring it up. Who would be in charge of giving you your payment at the end of the night?
Um, it was pretty much well, the agent. The agent would ask you if you want an advance,
Mm.
which was a little bit of money to get you to the next town and so forth. And
Yeah.
it was just the individual agent who was running that town that night.
Mhm. Okay,
And then
right.
and then pretty
Oh,
much, and then pretty much, when you got to the TV, they were paying you off pretty much there, catching up to all the 2 weeks of pay and so forth.
yeah.
Yeah.
I've got you. I've got you. Okay, I'll move on to this then. So when you first get into the WWF, you're doing just TV tapings. Who were the first travel partners when you started getting more bookings and going on the road then, and who were your early friends in the business?
Yeah, well, they were booking us and booking me mainly in the Philadelphia area. They were running a lot of spot shows. So they were running 3, 4 shows a night. And some of them were major towns. And as I say, a lot of them were these spot shows. They'd be in New England, Philadelphia area. And I would hook up pretty much with pretty boy Larry Sharp. I drove with him a lot, many times, because it was very convenient. Just he lived in Paulsboro, New Jersey, across the river, so we would meet maybe at his house or at the rest area or so forth. And also traveling with Chris Canyon and his brother Jack Carson, pretty much. And those were really the 3 or 4 individuals that I traveled with the most.
Hmm. So when do bookings start to become more regular rather than just like hanging around the Philadelphia, Pennsylvania area, and you're branching out more northeast and further?
Yeah, well, what I think I showed the company and Gino Gorilla Monsoon that I would go to a lot of these towns in the Philadelphia area just with my bag, and I'd walk in there and say, "Hey, Gino," I said, "I got my stuff today in case you're short." And you wouldn't believe how many times he'd tell me, "Hey, Ron, go ahead, get dressed." So I think, I showed them that I wanted to work there, nowhere else, but I wanted to work for them.
Mhm.
And then those little bookings started coming. Every time I went to the TV tapings, there'd be sheets of papers out there with your name on the top of it. So you just go through it, and one said Ron Shaw. I said, "Oh, okay, I got a booking or 2 or 3," and that's how it led up. Because when I started the TV with them in, I think it was June 1980, I was already getting booked in, I would say, August, bookings in August already. So you got another 4 or 5 months, and I was just booking started growing and growing and growing, and getting into the Philadelphia Spectrum, Baltimore Arena, Washington D.C., some of those big places there. So I already knew, and not only that, I really knew I was accepted into the company when I would go to TV and they would start giving me, and it was actually $500. And I say, "Well, what's this for?" And generally Arnold Skolin would be paying me $500. So, "Well, what's this for?" He goes, "Well, that's for the garden, Madison Square Garden." I said, "Well, I didn't work there." He goes, "Yeah, we know. We're taking care of you." And I realized, well, I'm part of the company. I'm getting $500, and I didn't even go to the garden. you know. So that happened every month until they started booking me in the garden, which was already early 1981.
So that would be a talent pool pay, wouldn't it? That would be the term that you're included in. Am I right there?
Talent pool pay. Well, I guess you could refer to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what would obviously there's no contracts in those days, but what would be sort of like a, and I know it's terribly vulgar to ask about money, but I'm going to anyway. Is is what would sort of be like a minimum that you could expect from Scranton, let's say, and then a bigger arena?
Sure. I don't know if anybody's talked about it and so forth, but I'll be honest with you and so forth. Spot shows, and don't forget we're talking the early '80s, because I'm gonna tell you this: I made more money in a year than Buddy Rogers, the world champion, did back in the days. So you see the progression of professional wrestling, and of course today, a lot of $1 million contracts, which from what I hear that they're canceling. But I would say, of course it all depended on if the house was filled or not. And 99% of the time the houses were filled. So you could go from anywhere from 150 to probably $300 in a spot show, and the big house shows, I, I they could have been pushing $700 for the night.
That's not bad in 1980 money as well. That's
No,
not nothing to sneeze at.
especially no, exactly. Especially in some of the bookings I would have is I can remember one time that they booked the Baltimore Arena at a 1 o'clock in the afternoon show, and just down the road 45 minutes was the DC Landover Maryland show, and I was on both of those. So here I am making maybe $1,400 for that little span of time, which was great. But as I say, the more you worked, the more money you made, of course.
And who did you have to room with in the early days to save as much money as possible?
Um, Boy, I'll tell you something. Uh, Real early on, I was kind of different, because what the boys would do is they would go from the one town and drive all the way to the next town. Okay, which could be long, could be short. I always picked in the middle. So, if somebody says, "Hey, you want to ride with me, and or can I ride with you?" I said, "Well, look, I'm stopping here, at this point here. That way I can get to bed earlier. I can get up earlier, maybe find a gym or something, and then I got all the time in the world to get to the next town." So I very rarely did, but there were a lot of times where uh, I would probably room with Moondog, Spot, Jerry Valiant, of course Larry Sharp, Sal Bellomo, whenever I could. But I'll be honest with you, the majority of the time I stayed to myself.
Yeah, I think that's a worthwhile investment in yourself, not having to share a room with somebody. Let me tell
Oh,
you,
you know it. Yeah,
that's
yeah.
definitely my opinion. Anyway, so I think we're talking like 83, 84 time, and you're told we've got a character for you, and then it's the Executioner, where it's probably the most overdone character in wrestling. I think is the Executioner. Who ended up coming up
Yeah.
with it, giving it to you, or did you propose it yourself?
Well, this is an interesting thing, and I can think back to this and say, man, what a great thing that had happened to me is that when I was early 1981, and we were doing a show in Allentown at the fair. So Vince McMahon Sr. was there that night, and he called me downstairs, and he goes, "You're a natural at this." And I said, "Wow." I said, "Man, I don't know how many guys have heard that in this business." And he said, "Are you able to travel?" And I said, thinking to myself real quick, I said, "Well, I think I've been traveling already, but I don't know what he means." And I said, "Yes, I am." He says, "Okay, well," and that was it. And then the next thing you know is that when I went up for the next TV taping, Monsoon says, "Hey, Ron," he goes, "get yourself royal blue mask, royal blue, like a Tarzan top and the long leotards." And so I did, and I came back. I guess probably maybe it took a couple of weeks for me to get it, but by the next TV taping, I brought him up, and they used me as the Executioner. And I said, "Okay, this is good." They were putting me over on TV already. Matter of fact, I have one of those matches on my website. Matter of fact, And then they in Hamburg, I did a couple as the executioner. And then they started booking me as the executioner. And I was still working as Ron Shaw too. So it was a little bit back and forth, you know. And so that started taking off. So I worked the entire 1981 as the executioner pretty much. And later in the year, they said, hey, you're going to be going to, and I told this story on the last show I was on, and I made a mistake. They're going to send, I said that they were going to send me to Calgary, and I made a mistake. They were sending me out to California for Mike LaBelle. And I said, this was pretty sudden because they were telling me I was going to leave like next week. And I'm saying to myself, oh man, I said, is this a good thing or not? You know, I got to keep in mind, I'm still a little bit green. Okay. And I decided to ask 3 people for their opinion. One was Kowalski. The other one was Bob Backlund, and the other one was SD Jones. 2 of those guys said, well, maybe it's not a good idea, you know, that you go out there. SD Jones says, well, you know, you're not going to make a lot of money out there, but, you know, give Vince a call. He'll probably send you some money. And that already, you know, here I am making great money. And I didn't want to lose that. And I'm thinking, well, maybe I won't go. Maybe I will. So I had told somebody that, I'm not going to go. And then one night, Monsoon says, Ron, he goes, look, he goes, you may not make a lot of money, but that will come later. And then I decided to say yes again. Then, giving it some more thought, I said, no, I'm not going to go. Now, we're on a tour of upstate New York. And Arnold Skolin was the agent up there. And he says, hey, Ron, he goes, give Vince a call. He wants to talk to you. So I give Vince a call in the afternoon before the last town that we were doing. And he says, I understand that you don't want to go out to California. I said, yeah. He says, okay. He goes, make tonight your last night. And I already, you know, pretty much knew that was coming. And I said, well, Vince, thank you anyway. I said, you know, I hope I had worked out for you. And that was pretty much it. You know, so that they let me go at that point. And but I went right to work months later with Kowalski doing his Bedlam from Boston, which eventually merged into Bruno and Dominic out in Pennsylvania area and so forth. So I was working for 2 years with Bruno, Dominic, and Kowalski those 2 years.
Well, you can't ask for much more as experience and growing, I suppose, at that point. Just going back to the Vinces, actually, this was a question I was going to save for later, but since you brought Senior up, interactions with Vince Senior and comparing him to Junior.
Oh yeah, well, I guess night and day. You know, at that time, I didn't have that much interaction with either one of them, and all I know is that Vince Senior was a very relaxed guy. I mean, really nice gentleman. And you know, I remember one night when I was in Hamburg that I missed a payoff somewhere along the line, you know, and I went in there into the back office there, and I always said, Mr. McMahon. I said, you know, Mr. McMahon, I said, I didn't get paid for Middletown, Connecticut. He goes, oh, okay. And here he ends up whipping out, might have been $250 right out of his pocket and paid me right there on the spot, you know. And I said, well, thank you, sir. I appreciate it. And, you know, talking to Vince was very limited pretty much because, you know, you mainly seen him only at TV. So, you know, he was too busy. But, you know, it was a couple times on phone calls more than anything else.
Yeah, I'll bring up Vince Jr. again because we're going to talk further on when we go into 1983. But one of the names that I noticed that you wrestled, and how can I never bring this man up, Andre the Giant. How was he to wrestle?
Wow. Yeah, I wrestled Andre maybe 3 times, and it was television. And I remember the first time, which is another match I do have on my website from Allentown. You have to take into consideration how big this guy is, being 450 pounds or whatever he was, and you know my hand can fit inside the palm of his hand, right? So you know here I am stepping into the ring, and I said, you know something, I got to make myself look as good as possible. And I attacked him from the beginning in that match where he was signing autographs, and I just went to work on him. Boom, boom, I'm punching and kicking and this and that and everything. And then he comes back with a headbutt and gives me a suplex, and then just does that big leap as if he's leaping across your chest. And let me tell you something. The guy hardly touched me that whole match. That's how professional Andre was. And, of course, Andre's had many years of experience already. And was I nervous at the time? Oh, yeah, yeah. But, I had to trust in who I was working with. And I did trust Andre.
It was one of those things, actually, that we ended up, because I've got a podcast with Don Muraco, and he mentioned the Executioners, and I think he got your name mixed up with, it would have been Killer Kowalski, in fact, who teamed up with John Studd. And I was thinking, there's the old, what Don thinks is a fallacy, that Andre hated John Studd, despite the fact they seem to work together for years. Did you ever notice anything between them as far as not getting along, or is that made up?
I've never seen anything, and in fact, I can go on to other people. I've never seen any real hatred except for Adrian Adonis and Dan Spivey.
Yeah.
That was about the only thing. But no, as far as Don and Andre, I've never ever saw anything that would lead me to any issues against him.
So I've always got to ask, did you ever spend any time with Andre outside of the ring, maybe in a restaurant or a bar?
Well, I can tell you this. No, I can't ever remember, but I can say one night, and I can remember the town exactly, Salisbury, Maryland, where we would occasionally do a show. And I got there early that night. So I'm sitting in the dressing room, and I was the first one there, and I was still dressed. And I see a young kid bringing in a case of bottles. And he puts them over by the locker, opens them up, and I'm saying, wow, 6, 7, or 8 bottles of champagne. I said, Andre must be here. And sure enough, here comes Andre coming in there with his suit, jacket on. And, how you doing, boss? And that's what he called everybody boss, And he'd sit down and we'd start talking, and then here he goes. He's grabbing a bottle, rips that cork right off, and drinks it down like it was a shot glass. But that was my only remembrance of Andre and his drinking binges.
Do you know what? That sort of makes sense now, because in the Andre documentary, they talk about him having the loudest farts of all time. And if you're having a bottle of champagne every 10 minutes, that might explain it.
Yes, and I'm sure they weren't tiny bubbles.
I've also got to ask this, and there's quite a lot of, in later years, you'd describe maybe The Undertaker or Yokozuna or whoever there may be as a locker room leader. Was Andre a locker room leader, as in you could go up to him and ask him advice or anything like that, or who might have been the locker room leader in that mold?
Well, if you're saying assuming or did I ever ask anybody for advice? Are you asking me that pretty much?
Well, I'm saying who would be the most accessible star to ask.
Right. Well, if I was to ask, sure, Andre would be one of those individuals. I've never asked any advice from anybody though at the time.
Right.
Myself. Yeah.
Okay, we'll move on then. And because I mentioned Don Muraco before, and you told me you had a couple of good Don Muraco stories, here's the time to hear the Don Muraco stories.
Oh, yeah. Well, hopefully Don would remember these, because I don't want him to call me a liar. I remember. Here's one. Again, we were on a tour of upstate New York, and Don was challenging Backlund for the championship belt. And they were doing these not 20-minute, 1 hour Broadways, okay. And I can remember during one of those matches, because if I was going to be later in the evening or earlier in the evening, whatever the case may be, I'd usually stick around to intermission. Then I would leave. So I'd be out in the hallway watching this match, and you have to say Bob Backlund out of all the guys in the company, was probably the best in shape guy. Okay, he was like the Energizer Bunny.
Hmm.
Okay, the guy couldn't stop. But that's a testament to Don, who would be working night after night doing 1 hour Broadways. And I remember one night, they're probably in the middle of the match, and a fan throws in the towel, a white towel, into the ring, as if Don should give up, you know. Don sees that. He starts dropping 2 or 3 elbows on the towel, elbow smashes on the towel. And he's flying through the air. Now you can imagine that. And I said, boy, I'll tell you, if I ever did that, I'd probably get fired. But Don got away with that, I'm sure. And I never heard anything that any heat about him doing that. But that was funny, because I saw that, I cracked up. Another instance was, and this was Don pretty much ribbing me all night long. We were doing 1981. They invited us in Atlantic City, to the Resorts International Hotel. And I was booked as the executioner that night. So when I got into the parking lot, I had to decide, should I walk through this casino with my hood on and risk having every security guard draw their guns on me? Or do I walk without a hood on and have one of the agents catch me and give me hell? Okay. So I decide I'm going to walk with the hood on through the casino. So I start doing that, because all I knew is I didn't exactly know where we were going, the auditorium that we were going to. And as I'm walking with the hood on, all I know is I see people just looking at me left and right. And you got to keep in mind that there's cameras all around, on the ceilings, everywhere. And here comes Don coming up behind me. He goes, holy crap. He goes, you're going to get us thrown the hell out of here. They're going to think you're robbing the place, And all evening long, he ribbed me. He's going to every one of the boys back there. Ron Shaw's walking through the casino with the hood on and everything like that. He goes, we're going to get thrown out of this place. And I know he was like kidding me and everything. But we went back there, I think, 2 or 3 more times. And that was some of my remembrances, of getting ribbed and Don doing that towel thing, the elbow smashes. Don was a great guy. I mean, he even took the time in battle royals to work with me a little bit, because in the battle royals it was always that the top names were working with each other, then you got the bottom guys working with each other. But I remember a couple of times that me and Don would be working against each other and throwing punches at each other real quick, and then we'd walk away. But he gave me some due respect.
With where Don goes, Fuji follows. Did you ever get ripped by Fuji?
No, I didn't, and I heard about some of that stuff, and I do remember one time in the Boston Garden. I'm sitting on the bench, and Fuji's walking around with this paper towel or something, and he's going to everybody, and not none of the big names, because I think they pretty much knew his shenanigans. And he's going, well, would you like to have one? I made these, And everybody's, no. And he comes up to me, try one. He could try one. These are good. I make them all the time. I said, no. I don't eat nothing before I work. I found out later what that was dog turds. Trying to pass them off as brownies or something. And I said, I got to stay away from this guy.
Yeah, and I think you would have done right to stay away from Fuji as well. I've heard so many from Don over the years, including some we couldn't include on the podcast because they were just too libelous. So there was some really good stuff. Listen, I'm actually going to give you a bit of a game now. So it's name association. So I'm going to give you a sentence, and you just tell me the person who most fits the description, and you cannot say yourself. So I'm going to give you the first line: funniest person in the locker room.
Funniest person in the locker room. Pete Doherty.
That's a good answer, that, and his name might come up in a bit as well. Last man standing at the bar.
Well, probably 2. Andre the Giant and Arnold Skolin.
Fine answers. The most picked on or bullied person in the locker room.
I got no answer for that one.
Nope. Okay. The wrestler whose hygiene was not what it could have been.
Well, I'd have to be pretty up close and personal. They know that answer, and I can't say, because sometimes we all didn't take showers. We just wanted to get to the hotel real quick. So no answer for that one.
Fair enough. So there was no one who you'd like wrestle occasionally and think, Jesus, wash your gear, pal.
No, I never had that. Never had that.
Really? Okay.
Maybe they might say something. They might say something against me because I occasionally had gotten ringworm. Like, who hasn't?
Yeah. My brother got it in doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu recently as well.
Yeah.
So he was called Molly Ringworm for a little while.
Oh,
The clumsiest wrestler in the ring.
oh, well, there were the couple of the preliminary guys that I'd probably say guys like Charlie or Browns and well, Fred Marzino's but no, none of the big names.
No, okay. Now this you actually mentioned before, so you might have to elaborate on it. The most memorable backstage fight, or fight in the ring, or fight wherever.
Yeah, well, I never seen that happen. But one night in Allentown, I'm sitting in my chair, and I see this guy come through the curtain because he just came from the outside. And I'm saying, wow, they got a new Japanese star they brought in here, and this guy was big, fat, uh, and then I'm looking at the face. I said, geez, that's Adonis. His face was swollen that I'd never seen his face. Like, you could not tell who he was. And all I know is when he came through there, Dan Spivey's sitting down the other end, and he says, I'll get you yet. I'll get you yet. And that was Adonis. Man, I did not recognize the poor guy. And of course, years later, found out what the story was about.
What was the story about, then?
Well, the story, and you'd find that on the internet. I mean, vaguely, if I can remember, because I looked at this, many years ago, that there was some heat in the ring, I think, between those two when they worked, and it just spilled over into the dressing room. I think Adonis went to charge Spivey, and Spivey was there, man. I mean, he caught him first, and I've worked with Dan Spivey many times. I would have never guessed this guy was you don't want to mess with this guy, and Dan was a great guy to work with.
Yeah, I've heard both things as well. Biggest ladies man.
I can't say myself.
Yeah, you can't say yourself.
No,
I was going to invite you to say yourself.
Me. No, I behaved on the road. Biggest ladies, man. Everybody liked Rick Martel. I don't know that for a fact, but all the women love Rick Martel.
Yeah, no, fine answer. Heaviest smoker. You've said a couple already, actually.
Repeat that again.
Heaviest smoker.
Heaviest smoker. Wow. Well, Fred Marzino.
Yeah.
this guy. Google Fred Marzino and you'll see what I've been talking about.
I will do indeed. I encourage everybody to do the same. I will say a couple more. Biggest ribber.
Well, Fuji had to be the one.
Yeah. I don't think you're not gonna top Fuji there. Best and worst road agents.
Best and worst road agents. Well, I look back to who paid me last. And that would be Angelo Savoldi. I never liked going to a town where he was in. I don't know what it was about it, but I loved Monsoon. I loved Skolin, and God, who was the other one? I forgot at the time. I forgot. But yeah, I loved working for Gino and Skolin.
Worst hotel you ever stayed in?
Oh boy. Well, they weren't exactly the big names unless I went to the airport and I stayed in one of the bigger names. But at the time, those little motels along the roadside, they were not bad. So I can't even say a name.
Nope. Okay, and there's got to be a name for here. The stiffest wrestler you ever worked with.
I can't. Let me tell you something. I know Angelo Mosca was probably pretty stiff, and especially if he didn't like you. But I never worked with him. But I did. So I can't say anybody else. But I can remember one time in Philadelphia in a battle royal. Angelo starts walking up to me in the ring, and all I said was, "Oh shit!" And so he had a smile on his face. He goes, "Go ahead and hit me." So I laid, and he says, "Hit me." I said, "Okay." So I laid in a forearm smash to his chest, and he just, he didn't flinch. And I said, "Go ahead, hit me back." And we exchanged 2 or 3 big blows. He just walked away. He goes, "Okay." but we laid them into each other, and believe me, I laid mine into his.
Was this not even
Yeah.
in the ring? This was just backstage.
No, this is in the Battle Royal.
Oh, in the Battle Royal.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I thought
Oh,
this
yeah.
was in the locker room.
You can have a lot of fun in the Battle Royal. I had. You ever hear of Manuel Soto?
Very vaguely, I know the name.
Yeah, back in the day, him and Pete Sanchez were the tag team champions. But we were working in the Battle Royal one time, and right in the middle of the ring, he comes up and gives me a kiss on the lips. So you can have some fun in the Battle Royals.
Well, you know what to do with a punch.
Was that fun? Maybe for him, but not for me.
I was going to say, you know what to do when someone punches you. That the other
Well,
one's going to be confusing.
That's right.
Yeah. Right, I'm going to give you a few more questions, then we'll a few more probably if you've got the time. One of the things I've noticed is in the people who you faced is you actually took on Pedro Morales a couple of times for the Intercontinental Championship, but also you challenged once for Bob Backlund's heavyweight gold. You've brought up Bob Backlund before, and you said he was just like the Energizer Bunny. But how do you think he was doing as champion? Because he was champion for 5 years, over 5 years, drawing the crowds in. He had some detractors, but what do you make of Bob?
Well, yeah. Number one, probably what you read. I'd like to say that was true, but even on the last show that I was on, those were not actual championship matches. I did work with those individuals many times, and when I was doing the executioner, it was in the beginning, and even down towards the end, they would bring me in as the executioner, maybe back in my area, and I did work with Backlund in high school for the championship. And Bob was a great guy to work with. As I say, him having the experience and so forth, I would listen to him and he'd allow me to do what I had to do and so forth, and we would have a good match. I'm not going to say they were always getting up doing high spots, but working with Bob was always great. And what a kind individual he was, because back in the dressing room, he would thank me and offer to buy dinner for me and my wife. So he'd want to hand me $50. I said, "No, Bob." I said, "No, come on, man. I can't take that from you. I'm getting paid. I mean, it was just an honor to work with you. Ron, take it." 2 or 3 times he gave me a $50 bill to go out and have dinner for putting him over.
Yeah.
Yeah, great guy Bob was. And Pedro Morales, another great guy. I mean, he was probably the one guy I worked with the most on TV. And I even said to myself, I said, "Boy, again, because, when you're working on TV, it was a lot of the same thing over and over when you worked with certain individuals. You'd get your heat on Pedro, and then he'd make his comeback, and he'd either give you the Boston Crab or the backbreaker and so forth. But Pedro was a very generous guy, and he remembered that, because when we would work in house shows, he really, really would give me an opportunity. He'd tell me, throw me over the top ropes, come out and get me, and so forth. And that's being very generous. And I have to say, one time, the very best match I ever had with Pedro, and we called him Pete back in the dressing room, was at the Hartford Civic Center, and I was the executioner that night, and I was working against him. And I know Vince was there that night, because the office is right in that area. And it happened to be, and all because of Pedro Morales, that he allowed me to work with him. It was one of the best matches there that night. Maybe it was the best match of the night. I don't want to take away from the big names at the time, because the people were into it. I came back to the dressing room. Everybody was saying, "Great." Even Fuji. Great match, man.
As he was offering you a dog turd. Great match. Do you want one?
One of his brownies. Yeah, and even Vince came back and gave me like a good nod. And it all comes down to is who you're working with. Are they going to help you out, make you look good, make you? And Pedro was a great guy, and I paid tribute to him on my website. I've got a match with him as the executioner in the Philadelphia Spectrum. And matter of fact, I will be adding some stuff in a couple of weeks with a match, a rare match where Pedro is the Intercontinental Champion. Attack him right from the beginning. So I'll be putting that on in a couple of weeks. Great guy. Great guy.
Yeah, don't worry. I'll be putting your website at the bottom of this so everybody will know where to go as well. And because I've mentioned the the two longest reigning WWF champions, Pedro Morales and Bob Backlund of that era, how could I not mention Bruno? Bruno was still in the company when you joined in 1980, but then he would leave soon afterwards, and then he'd come in part-time here and there. Did you have any interactions with Bruno?
Oh, man, I did. Yeah, Bruno. As I say, my one of my top 3 or 4 favorite wrestlers' names in the business, because Bruno portrayed the wrestler. Never came in with a jacket. Okay, always looked like the wrestler, and that's what you had to love. But when he left, and as I say, when Vince let me go at the end of 1981, I went to work for Kowalski, and they merged where they started doing the TV tapings in Allentown at the it's a Dorney Park, okay. And at the time, a lot of us guys were coming to work for Bruno, and they were putting me over pretty much. And I was tagging up with a guy named Hans Schroeder, if that rings a bell. But one night as heels, he turned on me and busted me open in the ring, and so that's who they were playing, me against him, pretty much. And they had the other main events and so forth going on. And one night, as I said, I talked to Bruno many times, but Bruno was going to interview me on the TV, and he interviewed me, and he wasn't happy with, I was kind of sounding bummed out and so forth, because that's what I wanted to sound like. Here he is, Sean Schroeder, I looked at him as a brother to get my, get my back when I need him and so forth. And here he turns on me and so forth. So after that, Bruno says, you need to get a little bit more fired up. So the next TV taping, I got fired up. And Bruno says, oh, a lot better, man, a lot better, but I've asked Bruno for advice many times too. I have to say that as one guy asked for some advice, Bruno. And when we both left in 1982, it's a funny thing. We both went back to Vince at the same time, because that was starting to sour. The pay was not getting as good. It seemed like it wore off, and it just couldn't compete. Everybody thought that was going to compete against the WWF.
This is Killer Kowalski's IWF you're talking about here, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it became the International Wrestling when they merged. And so it wasn't going that way. I mean, they brought in Jerry Valiant, Larry Zbyszko was in there, and then David Sammartino. And I gave Vince a call, and I said, Vince, I'd like to come back to work for you. He said, well, look, call my father. He's in Florida. And I called up, and I said, Mr. McMahon, I said, Rod Shaw, I said, I'd love to come back to work for you. And to give you an idea how this guy is, he says, well, he goes, we got a full roster. But you know what, Ron? He goes, come on back up to the next taping. And boom, there I go. I went working from 84 through 87 pretty much. And Bruno came back at the same time. So, they were coming back because, I think there was a lawsuit Bruno had against Vince, and they wanted to, squash that. So they brought him back as color commentator, and then, brought his kid in, David, and went on from there.
Well, I'll be bringing up David Sammartino. It was a pretty famous encounter, that, for people who don't know, so we'll talk about that in a little bit. I'm going to ask you some questions about what it's sort of like being... what would you describe yourself as? Because for the most part, you were, to put it politely, you were on the losing end. Were you enhancement talent? Were you preliminary? At times, you were in mid-card, facing some pretty big names and getting some stuff. Where would you sort of place yourself for the most part?
Enhancement talent, to a point of maybe semi-main events in some cases. I mean, I can give you, for instance, they were using me and Bret Hart as tag teams for a while, and one of the bigger shows we were at was in Long Island, and they putting us up against Gorilla and Sal Balomo, and they were putting us over, me and Bret, all the time over those two guys. Uh, Other instances were me and the Afonseca, the Samoans, against Gurria, Martel, and Slaughter. That was going on for a long time. So they treated me pretty well. And here's another thing too. When you're working in tag teams or 6-man tag team matches, and I'll give you another example. We wrestled the Freebirds in
Yeah.
Madison Square Garden. It was me, Butcher Vachon, and Pete Doherty. Now these guys got a lot more years than I do, right? So generally, what they would do, and that was a 2 out of 3 fall match, that one in Madison Square Garden. And what they would do is take the fall on the most junior guy, which would have been me. In that 2 out of 3 fall match, they took the fall on Vachon, and they took it on Doherty. So that's saying something a little bit. They're keeping me looking good. And again, in Philadelphia, which was a 1 fall match against the Freebirds, it was me, Rene Goulet, and I forget the other guy, but he was around many years before I was, and they took the fall on that guy instead of me. Okay, they were the senior guys, and that's pretty much what it is. It's just like a job. When you get laid off, the junior guy goes. So they always kept me to a point. Okay, I feel good about this. And I'm happy. I know where my role was, James.
Yeah.
Look, let's look at professional wrestling. This is the way I looked at it many years ago. Is that you're hired for a job and a position. Okay. And it's up to you to show your bosses that you can advance in the company. And I look at, any job, and even this professional wrestling was pretty much the same way. So, I showed them, and Vince Sr. gave me that opportunity. They're grooming me, so forth, to send me out to California. Yeah. And, and matter of fact, even after that, I found out that, well, they were going to let me win a big battle royal out there as the executioner and work with Andre. And then they were supposed to send me to Japan. That was the word. But, if they would have told me that ahead of time, I probably would not have hesitated, and I would have gone.
Yeah.
So,
I don't blame you though for not going, because at the time LA was dead pretty much anyway.
yeah.
I think it was gone by 82, wasn't it? And I know, because I interviewed Dr. Tom Pritchard recently a couple of times actually, and he was in LA at the dying days, and Mike LaBelle, he was just running it into the ground with bad creative. So if they told you all that,
Yeah,
I totally
if
understand.
when you hear names like the Mummy, a guy comes out wrapped up as the Mummy. I said, oh man, I don't want to be a cartoon character.
Mm.
I don't want to be this. This is sports entertainment, yeah. But I want to be portrayed as an athlete, a sport, wrestling,
Yeah.
and not this type of garbage.
Was there any other territories that you felt like you would have liked to have tried your luck in? Mid Atlantic, let's say.
Well, here's some interesting. I was very fortunate in my career. I never had to move anywhere. I always worked out of Philadelphia because the East Coast was just the hotbed of wrestling and so forth. And there was only one time, in 1985, which was an extremely busy year for me. I was working for Vince, but my bookings had dropped down, and I didn't care for that too much because at the time they had the promoter from the Carolinas, George Scott. So he brought a couple of his guys up and so forth. So that kind of like weaned me out of some bookings. So at the time, Rick Martel had left, and he went back up to work International Wrestling in Montreal with Dino Bravo. And he gave me a call. He says, "Hey, Ron, you want to come up?" Yeah, I said, "Yeah, okay. You come 2 or 3 days. We'll do TV and then a couple of house shows and so." I went up maybe 2 or 3 times, and after the third time, he called me and he says, "Hey, you want to come up permanent?" And I said, Rick, I said, I'm still working for Vince. I don't want to ruin that. I said, you're giving me an opportunity to come up there. I said, I'm also working for Crockett in Baltimore, and maybe a few little shows closer there, but I was always able to come home. So I am working for these 3 companies at the same time, and every time though, if I had a booking for Vince, and it may have been another promotion, well, I would cancel that other promotion, of course, because I never wanted to ruin,
Mm.
WWF. That was about the only time. And last before Adrian Donis was killed in a tragic accident up there in Canada, he gave me a call, and this might have been in 1987. It's hard to remember. He says, "Hey, we're going to come up. We're going to work for the Bearman. We'll use you pretty good and so forth. And of course, this was going to be during the summer. But you can't travel in those
No,
winters
you weren't
up
doing a
there.
death tour or
And
anything.
oh yeah, yeah. And I said, well, when would you need me? He says, well, probably about a couple of weeks. Well, it was shortly after that. I remember Jack Tunney's office gave me a call and says, hey, he goes, we're not going to use you. He goes, they died in an accident, him, the Bearman. And I said, wow. I said that that was unfortunate. But that was going to be a time I was going to probably go up to a territory there and stay up there for the summer. But I majority of my time I worked out of Philadelphia.
Mm. With your role when you weren't doing like semi-main events and stuff like that, was there anybody that you resented putting over?
No, because you know what? I've never had anything bad to say about anybody in this business. They respected me, and I respected them because I worked with them.
Mm.
Pretty much whatever they wanted, I worked with them, and that's why they allowed me to do what I could do in my time, especially when I had gotten experience. I can give you an example, working with SD Jones in Hamburg. I remember Gina, because they were split dressing rooms at the time. Okay, we couldn't go back and forth to each other. So occasionally Monsoon would come over, which he did that one evening. He says, "Hey Ron," he goes, "just listen to SD in the ring." I said, "Okay." And me and SD had a great match, and I got that video, and we were just calling high spot after high spot, and I don't know. They were just checking me out. Would I get nervous? Would I screw up? Which I didn't. We had a great 8-minute match with a lot of high spots and so forth. But everybody was very respectful to me,
Hmm.
and I thank them for that.
And I'll tell you what, actually, this is the opposite almost, because you mentioned SD Jones. Who of the talent who's, the level of SD Jones, Doherty, Salvatore Bellomo, Lanny Poffo, people like that, who of that group who were, preliminary talent, low on the card, who deserved a lot more than they got?
Um, can I say me?
You can
No,
say,
no,
well,
but
including
yeah,
yourself, but who else?
Well, let me tell you this. When you beat a big name like David Sammartino, and you come back 3 months later against a fat, out of shape guy who blows up stepping between the ropes, and I'm talking about George Skolin, the son of Arnold Skolin,
Yeah.
and you got to put him over. That says something to me. You know what I mean? But I can understand. And the funny thing about it is that I did not like having to put him over that night. Okay, I just beat one of the biggest names in the business. But one thing I did is that when he did a sunset flip on me, which was the finish, I had my foot on the outside of the rope, and I wanted to make sure that it was seen. And if you watch that match, I don't have that on my website. I do have it though. Is at the end, I'm bitching and I'm complaining to the referee that I had my foot out there, so it makes it look like that he got away with one. So that was the only time I was a little PO'd.
Yeah. And who of like the big names was like the most giving, the most who was just like you do this to me, you do this to me, and what I'm asking.
Oh yeah, no, I'm right off the bat. Pedro Morales, SD Jones, um, Dan Spivey,
Hmm?
Rick Martel. I got a great match with Rick Martel on my website from Montreal. And man, I mean, a lot of the comments are saying, "Wow, this is like main event looking. This is a great match and everything like that." Those guys were very, very, very kind to me.
Hmm. How much time we got? 'Cause it will change what order of questions I do.
Oh, Keep on going, man.
Okay, right then. You might regret that. I've got quite a few of them.
Well, I got my wife and dog outside, so I'm not being bothered right now.
No,
So
fair enough then. Well, it's warm. You're in Florida. They can deal with the morning sun. You
sure.
would wrestle Sergeant Slaughter quite a few times. I'm going to bring different names that you'd wrestle, several times over the years, and it's always nice to bring up Sergeant Slaughter because I don't think he really gets his due, maybe with the modern audience, for how great he was as a bad guy and a good guy just in the WWF in the early '80s. Give me some stories on the Sarge.
Wow, Bob was really, really a good guy. Another guy who's very generous and so forth in the ring when he had to be, and uh, I would say, every time I worked with Sarge, it was a give and take type of a match and so forth, and even a little bit later on, we were working in the NWF, and occasionally they would put me as the Mad Russian, which was, and I said, Bob. I think Bob Raskin was the promoter, an old time basketball promoter, and I said, Bob, I said, why don't you just put me in the round? He goes, well, we need a main event, you know what I mean, and the Russian gimmick. And I'll tell you, Bob would take these bumps that I wouldn't think he'd be, injuring his back, taking a chance injuring his back in a match like this, especially with maybe 200, 300, 400 people. But you have to understand that, the promoter would go out to all these businesses and they would buy ads in a book, which was 5 times more than what the people were charging to come in and see. So we were getting paid well, Bob even took the opportunity in Hamburg one time to he took me into the shower and he says, "Hey," he goes, "do you think that you could do a DI type of a gimmick with me?" And he goes, address me like I'm a private or something, and maybe I was just in an area where, just feet away were the biggest names in the business, and I'm going to be yelling and screaming. And I just kind of thought, I said, maybe that's not the way to go. I said, Bob, I said, I don't know if I maybe be interested in doing that. And later on, I think he had gotten Kernodle or Terry Daniels, something like that. But I
Jim
guess
Nelson did that as well. I think he was like a
yeah,
private.
yeah. So he was looking for those private type of things, and that didn't hurt me anything. That was early on, and so forth. But yeah, Sarge was a good guy. Yeah,
Yeah.
great guy.
Were you in the building that day when he turns good guy and defends America against the evil Iranian Sheiky?
Oh, I can't recall. I mean, there's some things that I can remember as though it was yesterday, and some things I just don't remember that. No.
No, that's fair enough then. So do you remember any other storylines or? And I hate using the wrestling vernacular, but I can't think of the. It's just quicker to say it, unfortunately. But something like that where you're in the building and thought, "Wow, that worked with the fans hugely."
Um, yeah, I think it was. I think one comes to mind. I was in Madison Square Garden when this match took place, and it was your favorite wrestler, Don Muraco,
Uh-huh.
against Superfly Jimmy Snuka, and a tremendous match they had, and it finished with it was a steel cage match, and it finished with Snuka climbing the steel cage and doing that big body splash against Don, and Don was just he was less laying there still in that ring. He kept his hands by his side so he wouldn't get injured, and he didn't even come up or anything. He just laid there. He trusted Snuka, and they were showing that match on the little monitor in Hamburg, where Vince Senior and Vince were back there, and I guess they were going to show that as part of the show. And we went all back in there, and when that splash happened, man, you could hear the people pop. I mean that was probably one of the biggest reactions I've heard in wrestling, and it even goes beyond Larry Zbyszko turning on Bruno, you know. So, but of course, you're talking about 15,000 people versus maybe 3,000 people in a little arena, so the sound is going to be a lot more, But that was something right
Yeah,
there.
it's funny you mention actually because I talked with Don this Monday
Mm.
for 2 episodes about the whole Snooker thing, and he was injured on the splash. Apparently, Snooker kneed him in the thigh when he landed. I just said that was the
Oh,
worst Charlie horse I've ever had in my entire life.
Oh, yeah. Well, I see. I didn't know that. Yeah, and then that I'm sure that could have happened. Yeah, that's.
Yeah.
I know I've had my share of injuries, and especially having to work with extreme back pain. Uh, but yeah, I can imagine. And I'm sure he went on. He was a trooper and went on and kept on working too. I'll bet.
Oh, absolutely. I doubt he would have missed a single day, let me tell you. I'll move on to this then. We brought it up before with Vince McMahon Jr. He obviously buys the company from his father. His father's there, here and there, and then he's not. He gets sick with cancer. He dies quite soon after selling the company to Vince. Do you remember, just from a talent point of view, how the company changed and when the company changed when it went from senior to junior?
Yeah, I mean, you could start seeing a little more of the show business aspect coming into that. Okay. It was, yeah, it was getting a little bit more glitzier. I guess bringing in, like Cyndi Lauper, stuff like that for the rock and wrestling type of atmosphere that it went on to be, and bringing on some of these major stars and WrestleMania stuff like that. But yeah, you could see a shift. It was like as if Vince had all these great ideas, but he just couldn't do them yet.
Hmm.
His father passed because his father was old school, and when there were territories that you could go to, that was a thing. That was a great thing. They all worked, those owners of those territories, Gagne and Crockett and them and so forth. They all work together,
Hmm.
and I would like to have still seen it that way for all these years, because as I say, I'm as old school as I can get too.
Yeah,
I don't like the stuff of today. I've never watched it till after Hogan pretty much left. I haven't turned it on to watch it. Don't care what's going on.
I was going to say, I could tell when you were giving me that answer, you're just not a fan of the more cartoony aspects and everything. So, what was Vince McMahon like as a boss then? Because it sounds like he was just absolutely ruthless.
Well, as I say, I didn't have to deal with him. Uh, a lot of the big names will have more stories than I can tell you. But as I say, I only started seeing him, and when we started going to Poughkeepsie, excuse me, and pretty much he just walk around and say a few words to people here and there, and I think probably pretty much he was just saying to the agents to speak to the talent for him, pretty much.
Hmm.
I mean, not unless it was Hogan or something that had to come up and talk to him. So I've never seen too much interaction.
No, okay then. Well, between Junior taking over and WrestleMania, so I'm sort of focusing on maybe late '82 to '83. Do you remember a change in your travel schedule, in your bookings, and were you ever sent sort of further afield in the United States to battle in, let's say, California? Where the LaBelles had left California open, the battling with the AWA, or anywhere else where you were going into when you were basically going into enemy territory.
Well, 82, as I say, 82 and 83, I was with International Wrestling.
Yeah.
Okay, so I wasn't with Vince those 2 years. But when I came back in 84, uh, not that I was going to those places, but I mean, I was going to, they booked me in St. Louis. Um, they would book me in Florida. It's coming into, Tampa, Jacksonville. Um, and, and you could tell that those were like southern rings because they were like those cable wires and ropes and but again I can't think back and say, well, was there any heat between the promoters and so forth, but it was, the idea was is that he was starting to take the talent away out of all those guys, where they ended up folding, and giving them, paying them a lot more than what they were making back there. And I mean, who wouldn't leave?
Well, that feeds in perfectly to my next question then. Who wouldn't leave indeed when they were throwing the money that they were at Hulk Hogan? You actually wrestled. He was one of your first matches in the WWF against Hulk Hogan. I don't know how much interaction you had with him after he came back and he was WWF champion immediately, but what was he like in 1980 to work with and hang around with?
Um, I remember he always came with Brutus Beefcake.
Yeah.
Brutus worked because of Hulk Hogan. Okay, and it's just like Dominic DeNucci always worked because of Bruno. Wherever Bruno went, Dominic went, and he worked and everything. Um, my first match is, I guess he was working as a heel at the time, and of course, I had to go in there as a baby, I guess. And I can remember us locking up sometimes. He threw a couple punches, this and that. He sat me up on the top rope and just came over and gave me a light smack on the face. And he just backed off. And we went into a finish, which I think he just dropped his leg over my throat, which was his finishing move and so forth. And, I could see, even though as green as I was, I could see that he was like not sure of himself in there. And back in the dressing room, he actually came up to me, he thanked me, and he said, I guess, I don't know why I set you up on that rope and gave you a smack. Now, when you're telling somebody that, you're not exactly sure of yourself in the ring either. You know what I mean? But he had a lot, even though he was, I guess, green, he still had more experience than I did because I guess he was working in Georgia before that, a little bit back and forth. But that was my experience with him, and I can say to my credit, hey, I worked with Hulk Hogan.
Did you ever speak to him at all when he came back in 80? It was very late 83, but it was 83 December, I think.
He would always come in to the dressing room. Hey, how you doing, Ron? And we shake hands and so forth. And no, I never, because he was pretty much in his own dressing room. Okay.
Yeah.
I did talk to him in 1985, the night of that Phantom submission match, or as I call it, the big upset. And I had a little bit of a lengthy conversation with him, not that much, but a little bit afterwards too.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what then, let's go straight to the Phantom submission match. But before we do, David Sammartino, he was working for actually quite a few years before he got to the WWF. Your advice, obviously it's going to be retrospective and it's too late and everything, but what would you have done with David Sammartino rather than bring him into the WWF and then just compare him to Bruno and have Bruno come out with him? Because that just wasn't going to be the best thing for him long term.
What would I have done if I was the promoter?
Yes, yeah.
Well, number one, David Sammartino was a great worker, great knowledge of holds, counter holds, and man, he was strong. And the very first match, he's mentioned this in these other wrestling news magazines, is that he went over on me so many times on TV, which wasn't true. Our first match was actually in Poughkeepsie, New York, when they first brought him in for the first TV, and I was the first guy that worked with him. So all we did was, there was no chopping meat, anything like that. We were just exchanging hold for hold. I'd get a hold on, he'd counter, boom, 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 and I got a little pissed off. I picked him up and I gave him a real hard slam to the mat. And then he turns around, gives me another slam, and then he picks me up, presses me over his head, and pins me. David was a great talent. He should have gone a lot further, and I probably would have used him a lot. I can understand him being a hothead, pissed off about things. But something, when you're working for the number one company in the world and you're making a great paycheck, why would you want to ruin it?
With David then, I'm trying to think. Would you have maybe even changed his name? Just get away from Sammartino. It means too much in the territory.
No, I wouldn't have done that.
No. Okay.
And then there's been a lot of successful, the sons that follow the father name. We can mention a whole bunch right here. I just think, could they have used him and his father as world tag team champions? I didn't know how much, if Bruno really wanted to work that much at the time, because when they came out, in Madison Square Garden, they got the biggest cheers, and the only problem is I just don't know, because if they used them as the tag team champions and then David would have really gotten over pretty much and Bruno bowed out, hey, there was an opening right there for Bruno to become a world champion maybe.
Mm-hmm. I don't think Bruno would have wanted to be world champion. As far as I know, the only reason Bruno came back to the ring was to support David, and when Bruno was on the card, then David would do better on the card, and when Bruno wasn't, then David was shunted back to the bottom. So, I mean, that's probably why he was quite unhappy at the time. Which leads us to the Phantom submission match. Take us through the entire story. Where was it originally? The arena.
That was in my hometown, Philadelphia Spectrum, which is a great thing that it was in my hometown. All I can remember is that, and as I said, I've told this on other shows, is that I saw who I was working with that night, and Hogan was already finished wrestling. I think he was wrestling the Sheik that night, but he came back to me. Hulk Hogan did, and he was telling me, "Hey, look, something's going to go down tonight with David. Okay, I'm not sure what it is." Then Bobby the Brain Heenan comes back, and he's pretty much giving me the same type of, words and so forth. And I started thinking to myself, "Oh, what's going to go on here? Is he going to make an example of me in the ring? Is this going to be a shoot? Because I've been in a couple shoots before in my life. Okay, I didn't know what was going to happen. So we go into the ring, and I've never given my full, complete story. We've heard about it from David. David did an interview about it, and he pretty much laid it out. But in David's interview, he did say, "Hey, he hurt my back. He was the better man that night," and so forth. But I went out there, and I'm sure you've seen that match a few times, is that, I laid 2 smashes with my fist right behind his neck. And then 6 or 7 body slams later, my hand was raised, And that's as far as I've gone with that whole story. I mean, I've never said completely, was it this or was it that? Because, I've been in shoots before, and, I can give you an example. Back in 1983, there was this, when we were doing international wrestling, a kid back in Pittsburgh who was maybe had an inch on me, and I'm 6'3". So I was 260 pounds at the time. And this kid, he was an ex-football player, great shape, and he's coming in the ring and he's not selling for me. Okay. And I said, "Man," I said, you need to do something here, pal. I said, "I'm not going to look like an asshole." And he just kept on doing it. And I got him in a reverse armbar, and I just took him right down to the mat, and I either hyperextended his elbow or broke something. And he learned real fast. But that match had to end really quick. And matter of fact, somebody to this day made a comment on it on the internet, and I've got that on my website. Hey, Ron Shaw, when they're pissed off, you just don't take it lightly, I've been in other shoots with the Samoans and a couple other guys and so forth. And I said, wow. I said, I was almost in a riot in the Philippines where people started turning on us and everything. And, we had to fight ourselves to get the hell out of there, But that's as much as I've said about that match. But I've given David credit over the years. He was a great worker, and the guy was strong.
With just before we go off that, what was David upset with particularly that night? Did you ever find out?
I don't know. I didn't see him until he got in the ring, and all I know is that when he left, he didn't shower. I heard that his ribs were hurting, and he drove back to Atlanta that night.
Was that the last match he had in the WWF?
Yeah, that was. I know they brought him back again for a few shows, and then he left again. I don't know.
Well, I know you said you'd never said it before on any interview, but I'm going to ask you anyway. So, what was the full deal with it, or are you just going to keep quiet and?
Well, it's like I said, I'm leaving it out there because still today, this is still talked about. This match, it's still fresh. You watch these videos and find them somewhere else on the internet, and I can see comments from 3-4 months ago and so forth. And I got all those comments that are on my website and so forth. So people are still talking about this match today. And as I say, I'm leaving it out there. I think there's a little bit of mystery behind it, and I'm going to leave it like that.
Well, do you know what? There's nothing wrong with a bit of mystery, especially in 2021 where everybody's friends with everybody and they're all on Twitter, the people they're feuding with, and it's right. Just not quite the same. Okay, I'm going to ask you one more thing, and then we'll go to the main event, and then I will thank you for your time. You're there until probably 86. I think booking starts slowing down around 86, and then you don't make any further appearances after that year. Was this just purely you were getting less bookings from them, or you wanted to try something else, or why did you end up leaving the WWF?
Well, actually, it was still 1987. I was still working with them through 1987. Yeah, then the bookings did drop down, and I started seeing the direction that they were going a little bit more, and more talent coming in, and they were actually weeding out the preliminary guys and making guys like Mike Sharp, S.D. Jones, Lanny Poffo, as if they were the preliminary guys. Okay, and the Moondogs, preliminary guys, and so forth. And I said, there's this NWF that's opening up, and the promoter contacted me, and he says, hey, I'd like to resurrect the Executioner thing. So I said, okay, I got a guy who's pretty much my size. We look identical almost, which with AJ Petruzzi, who lived up the road there in Jim Thorpe, PA. So we started doing a lot of TV, and so we did that for pretty much 2 years. And then after that, I went to Joel Goodhart. Are you familiar?
Yeah, I am. It's sort of a precursor to ECW, wasn't it? Was it TWA? Tri-State?
Correct. Yeah, Tri-State Wrestling. But we opened up a wrestling school in Philadelphia. And my dog is trying to get in, but he's got to wait. So we opened up a wrestling school, and he had a radio show at the time. So everything was really working out good because we had gotten a lot of students. And then he started promoting these shows. And down at the Philadelphia, not the Civic Center or whatever it was a pretty good hall. He was bringing in a lot of names. I mean, top names. But the problem was, there's no way you're going to make money bringing in these types of names, because these guys right off the bat are going to want their airfare paid for. They're going to want their hotel paid for. And I don't think, and especially it wasn't even selling out yet. But these were great matches beyond what the WWF was even putting out. I mean, when you have the original Sheik against Abdullah the Butcher, that's pretty hot and heavy. But that didn't do well. And I bowed out before that. I had a couple of matches in there. I did a referee against the Sandman and JT Smith, which was probably the hottest finish there that night, because I was booed and trash was being thrown on me, and I had somebody even threaten me to stab me on the way back to the dressing room. That's how much heat I got, and that's on my website. I got away from that. Got away from the school because Tri-State Wrestling wasn't going to be an option for me. I didn't want to retire yet, so I called Kowalski up. I said, Walter, I'm almost ready to retire. I said, there's really nothing going on. He goes, well, what about Vince? I said, I could call him back and see what happens, but I just don't want to. Is there anything else? He goes, well, I don't want you working for me because I got a whole bunch of these guys from the schools that I got to give jobs to, He goes, is your passport up to date? I said, yeah, it is. He goes, all right. He goes, I'm going to give your name to somebody. So he did, and pretty much throughout the 90s, I was traveling overseas for a promoter who was doing these super shows. And he would get talent from here and there and everything and put on a big show. So usually the first week of the month, I was pretty much gone, and it was still a living. They gave me the guarantees and all that and everything I needed. And at the end of 1999, I said, I think this is the end of it. And I retired. And I moved to Florida.
Which countries were you going to when you're doing this?
I was in the UK, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, not for other smaller companies and so forth. They did Mexico. I never was in Mexico. I don't know why. In the States, there was a few spots in the States. A lot of the islands, Germany. So yeah.
Did you ever do
they would go back? They would go back there again and again, and so forth.
Did you ever do the catch wrestling for Otto Vance?
The catch wrestling?
Yeah, the catch wrestling tournaments, the CWA in Germany.
Boy, I tell you, I have to think back because this is a long time.
I should say
ago.
The tent tours. That would be.
It all sounds familiar to me.
You may have been there.
I can't. I just. You have to remember this, James. There's some things I find on the internet which I see. I say, man, I didn't know that happened. I can't remember that happened, and there it is, right in front of my eyes. Yeah.
Oh, dearie. I'll tell you what, then I'll throw it to the main event, and it's sort of similar to the name association thing, and it's called the firing line. I'm going to fire some names at you, and as weird as it sounds, a lot of the names I'm going to say we've actually already mentioned, and the very first one is Danny Spivey.
Danny Spivey, good talent. I don't know if the boys liked him as much. I enjoyed working. I enjoyed working with Danny every opportunity I could, and he was very generous again with me in the ring.
Yeah, I should also say, if you feel the need to throw in a story, please do. The next one's the Grand Wizard, Ernie Roth.
Oh man, he was a nice guy. I mean, he would always. I can remember in Hamburg because the one side of the dressing room for the heel was so small. I mean, all those guys, Fred Blassie, Lou Albano, they all had their seat at this one locker, and I would purposely walk in there, sit down there, and Shaw and Blassie and Albano be yelling at me, kidding around. Hey, this is our seat. Get the hell over there. But Ernie would sit down next to me. He goes, Ron. He goes, you're really doing well. You're showing that you can do this business and everything like that. And he was very, very, uh, happy with a guy who, they all knew Kowalski well. I think one of the biggest things, the reason why I was taken care of so well was because, Kowalski trained me, and Monsoon and Kowalski were great friends. So that helped me out. But the Wizard was a great guy, nice guy.
Yeah, Don always tells me that before he got into wrestling, he was he was an evangelist on the radio.
Whoa. Yeah, he could have passed as one.
Yeah.
He was, back in the day, I didn't know, but of course, he was the first manager that came out of the closet as being gay and so forth. And I can remember back in my days as a little guy watching wrestling that he managed Beautiful Bobby, which was his lover.
Oh.
Yeah.
Which beautiful Bobby? Not Eaton, surely.
Well, yeah.
So,
Well, you'd have to go back probably to the '60s. And something fine. Probably Google Beautiful Bobby managed by the Grand Wizard,
There we go. There's something for the viewers to find out there. Dr. D. David Schultz.
Wow. There's a loose cannon, I think. He looked like he was pissed off all the time. I never worked with him, but I know one thing is you didn't want to get him PO'd. And I'm not going to mention a guy who I know very well who worked with him in the Spectrum. Before they even started the match, he just went up to David and just gently just slapped his hand. And you could see how pissed off he was. And he just was shooting with him the whole time. And yeah, he's that type of individual. A little bit of a loose cannon.
Oh, you can't give the story, not give the name, surely.
Nah, because he checks out my website all the time and follows these interviews. So,
Well,
he was a good guy.
Okay, well, whoever it was, if you want to admit it, please come out and say it. Next one.
I'm not going to mention AJ Petruzzi.
No.
Sorry.
We'll go for Haku. King Tonga, you wrestled him quite a few times as well.
King Tonga, right?
Yep.
Oh yeah. Well, there's a guy who I didn't know about either, and worked with him quite a few times. Very, very light, easy to work with, and I remember one time I body slammed him in the ring, and I was getting ready to give him a big elbow smash, and either he didn't hear me because I said move. And I came down with that elbow smash across his chest as if that was the real thing, And he's laying there. I said, "Man, sorry, bro. I told you to move." Goes, "That's all right." But yeah, I found out, man, that guy you don't want to mess with.
No,
he never returned a receipt. Gave me a receipt back or nothing. So
we found out with several people. Jesse Barr's the last story I've heard. Jimmy Jack Funk, who nearly got his eye rolled across the floor. The next one I've never asked before a name. Jules Strongbow.
Oh, I worked with Jules a lot in the end. And another good guy, very generous in the ring, and you could always work with him, so forth. Yeah, I mean, back in the WWF days, him and Jay Strongbow, he wasn't exactly the favorite from what I had heard. Of course, I wasn't there at the time. But outside the ring, yeah, he's a good guy. Good guy.
Bulldog Brower.
Oh man, one of my favorites. I mean, as a kid, I always liked those like lunatic guys, and this guy, he might have been close to being a real one because he was the best. I mean, I'll go back and I watch footage of the old WWF days, and that's when he was big and so forth. And I was in my very first trip to the Philippines. I was with Brower there, uh, but I worked with Dick one time as a babyface in a spot show, and I did one of these little quick shoot moves with him that Kowalski taught me, where I drop down on my knees, I grab him behind the heel with my hands, cut my hands behind his heel, and I threw my shoulder into his knee to take him down. I don't know what made me do that, but I just decided to do that. And back in the dressing room, he goes, "Hey, what are you doing, man?" He goes, "I could get hurt, doing that." And I said, "Yeah, I guess one thing Kowalski taught me." And I said, "I thought I'd try it out." But I was green at the time. But I love Dick Brower, man, one of the great workers of the time.
Yeah, do you know, this is a question that I should have asked before, but I didn't. Who was, when you were in the business, who was the toughest wrestler? Who was the most hard as nails that you'd never want to try?
I thought it was Paul Orndorff.
Really?
I thought it was Paul Orndorff, and we had him. I was booked against him in upstate New York, where they held the Olympics. The one, what the heck was it called? I don't remember. But it was all these white buildings they had built for the Olympics and so forth, and there was really nobody there, unfortunately. And I said, man, this guy looks like he's stiff all the time. But I worked with him, and man, didn't even know that he was touching me.
Hmm.
And it was a good match, but we didn't kill ourselves because there was nobody there.
Yeah. With the next one, if you don't have any stories, I've got a replacement name: Gary Michael Capetta.
Oh, Gary, yeah, Gary was another guy. This is funny because I told you earlier in the show that I was showing up after they invited me to do TV shows. I'd go to all these little local spot shows just with my bag and everything. And sure enough, so did Gary, in case they needed a ring announcer. And so me and Gary would exchange these little stories. But Gary was doing this at the old Philadelphia Arena, but I think they brought in somebody else. And then they started using Gary just as much. But yeah, Gary's a nice guy.
I was going to ask Bill Apter. Did you have much interaction with Bill?
No, none at all.
No, none at all. Someone you did wrestle on several occasions, Uncle Elmer.
Yeah, one time in Toronto's Maple Leaf Gardens. That's the only one I can remember. I don't remember too much about that match, and I know he was another guy who used drop the leg across the throat. Couldn't have been that much of a match. These guys like 6'9", fat and everything. What can you really do? I mean, I even worked with John Studd one time, and it was the same type of match. They were having the Philadelphia 76ers in the Spectrum, and as part of the after show, they'd have three wrestling matches. And originally, I was booked against somebody who I really wanted to work with, and because I knew it was going to be a great match. And then Monsoon puts me with Stud. I say, oh no. So all I remember is that the referee comes up to both of us, and he goes to Johnny. He goes, "What are you going to do?" He goes, "As soon as I put him down to the mat, count 3." I said, "Oh Jesus Christ!" I said, "This is that type of match it's going to be." And it wasn't a match that I want to remember. It just wasn't meant to be. Me against him. So yeah, but he did what he did. He put me down to the mat. 1, 2, 3. That was it.
Oh, fair enough. You've mentioned heights before, Big John Studd and other people, and Uncle Elmer 6'9". What is the shoot height of Big Ron?
Excuse me?
The shoot height.
Oh, my height actually.
Yes.
I'm 6'3". I'm currently 240 pounds, and I still work out. I got my own gym here in the house, and I still work out 3 days a week. So I'll be 64 next Friday, November 5th, and I feel great. I'm playing golf 3 times a week, working out, and plus my dog. That's another workout.
I'll give you a few more names. JYD, the dog.
Oh yeah, he's another good guy to work with. I worked with him a lot of times on TV. Another guy that's very easy to work with. No issues with him.
Funny we mentioned him at the beginning of the show, or you did, in fact. Pat Patterson.
Pat Patterson. Wow, another good guy. I got a great match, and this was one of these matches, James, that I never remembered. It was from Long Island, New York, big house show, and they were interviewing Pat at the beginning of the show, and Pat was nice enough to say, "Well, I'm taking on Ron Shaw today." Ron Shaw has been here in the World Wrestling Federation for 4 years. He's a rule breaker and this and that. And we went out as the first match, and Pat just sold for me. I mean, throw him out of the ring a couple times, this and that. And that's on my website too. That was one of my best matches with Pat. Great match.
Danny Davis.
Danny Davis. Yeah, well, yeah, good referee. A little bit of a jokester, and we teamed up when he was Mr. X a couple times. I remember in Boston Garden and so forth. We took on some guys, and they actually put us over a few times. I know one time on TV. Well, TV is TV, But Danny Davis was a good guy.
Don told me a story where Fuji or Don they gave him a bag of something that he was hoping it would be something more illicit than sweet and low that he ended up getting. I know that. Rocky Johnson.
Oh, nice guy. Boy, what a gentleman. I worked with him a lot of times also. Great guy. That's all I could say. Look, everybody was great. You got today you got the wrong show, Wrestling Shoot Interviews, because you're not going to hear anything bad out of my mouth.
Do you know what, right? I don't know what. I'm going to actually change the name because I put Wrestling Shoot Interviews because it was easy to Google. Right, that's the only reason I thought, well, I'll put it as that. But then I think it's got like negative connotations as well. So I'll probably end up changing the name soon. But I'm going to give you one more name. And there's always a story with this fella, Captain Lou Albano.
Oh, yeah. Lou was one of the great crazy maniacs on interviews. I'm always trying to crack up Vince on the interviews, and Blassie did the same thing pretty much. But Lou was, I would talk to him. It was just in general, nothing about the business and so forth. But yeah, Lou was a credit to the business.
Did you were you ever party to when someone would give him a bottle of vodka or a bottle of scotch or whatever it was and say, "Go nuts, Captain"?
Oh no, that wasn't me. And that was it.
Oh, sorry. Say that line again. The audio went dead.
Oh, I'm saying I'm sure Lou did all his drinking on the way to the shows, and that was pretty much it. So he was half gone when he got there.
Oh, dearie me, I've heard loads of stories about Lou. They're always happy stories as well, or funny stories, and telling Vince McMahon Senior that he was a dirty Italian to his face, and then he'd get fired, and then he'd get brought back the next day when he called and apologised. But yeah, he was quite a character, so I hear. Before I let you go, and that was the end of the firing line. Before I let you go, you've got to hit me some plugs. You've mentioned the website. What is the website? I'll put it on every clip.
It's Big Ron Shaw WWF.com. And I've got a lot on there. I've been doing this since 2015. I've got all my local newspapers have done stories on me, and I got some of the radio shows on there, and hope to have yours on there. Or I'm gonna advertise your show, James, on my website, and I get a lot of feedback from that and so forth. And it's not only about me; it's about the great stars of yesterday. And there's stuff on there that my current pictures. A lot of people said, "What am I doing in my retirement?" So everywhere as I go, concerts and so forth, I'll take pictures of some of my favorite groups, and I always say, "Hey, this was videotaped by me, not taken off of YouTube." Car shows. I own a lot of cars, and I'm getting ready to factory build a 2022 California Special Mustang in a Hyper Orange, which from what I understand is going to be a little bit delayed because they're having problems with the computer chips and so forth. But I want to get that out to a car show, and I'm having a bunch of fun in my retirement. But I urge everybody, go there. I got my bookings, majority of the bookings, and there's a lot there. And I'll be putting some stuff on in the next week. And if your show is going to be ready to air, I can advertise it right away.
This show, I don't know when it's going to be ready to air. I'm banking interviews for the short term in the run up to Christmas, so I don't have to work over Christmas. But as soon as it's done, I will send you the links. I'll send you everything about it.
Fair enough.
I was also going to say with the Mustang, I'm hoping to get a Mustang But it's a European Mustang. They only do. They brought out a bullet
White tail
version.
lights.
What's that?
Well, they do white tail lights. They put on the European versions, and they do
I
red tail lights here in the U.S. And funny thing about it is, in Europe they want the red tail lights, and here we want the white tail lights. But you can get that after factory on the internet, you know.
Just I'll tell you, that's not really a thing here. I mean, it sort of is maybe like younger crowds, but you don't really modify cars that much. Like car modding isn't as anywhere near as big as it is in America. I know that, but I'm hoping to get like I might even just get like the lame 2.3 Eco Boost just because I'm cheap.
Eco Boost.
Yeah, I might get the Eco Boost. I've not decided yet, but I don't know. I might splash out, get the 5-liter.
Let me tell you something. I had a 2019 California Special, and I had factory built my 2019 Corvette Stingray with 7-speed manual transmission, and that I'm never giving away. I got 4,000 miles on it. But that Mustang is so loud. I mean, you can hear it coming from 2 blocks away. But and that's what I'm hoping, that the 2022 is still the same, nice and loud.
That's what I'm hoping as well, because I hate my neighbours. I want to wake them up every single night. Scare them awake, I really do. Right, so I tell you what, oh God, I've smashed the microphone as well. I'm going to thank you so much, Ron, for joining me. I'm going to do the little sign off here, so thank you as well for joining us. On behalf of Big Ron Shaw, thank you very much, and I will catch you next week.
Thank you, James.